Have any of you ever been frustrated by bureaucracy? That's it. Go ahead and raise your hands. Nobody can see you. All right, looking around, I see pretty much everybody's got their hands up. For those of you who don't, you might want to broaden your definition of bureaucracy a little bit. So for example, when you were a child growing up, did your parents perhaps have some kinds of rules about how much TV you could watch each day or what time you had to go to bed? And despite the fact that you had really good reasons why you needed an exception, why you should be staying up later, your parents just wouldn't listen to reason, right? The rules were the rules. Okay, well, that's pretty much what bureaucracy looks like to most of us in most cases. My name is Mark Schwartz, and I'm an enterprise strategist at AWS, and I want to talk to you today a little bit about bureaucracy and what it is and how we might think about overcoming it when it gets in our way. All right, so my next question for you. I think some of you probably are involved in some kind of organizational transformation. Let's say a transformation to DevOps or digital ways of working in general. And you're probably running into some bureaucratic impediments, I think. I know I was the CIO of US Citizenship and Immigration Services in the Department of Homeland Security. As you can imagine, we had some bureaucracy to contend with in the federal government. But from what I've heard, it's really not just the government that is filled with bureaucracy. I talked to executives from large corporations from around the world in different industries. From what I can see, it's large enterprises in general are very good at bureaucracy. Small companies sometimes also, but as a company becomes bigger, it tends to wrap itself in bureaucratic process. Also, there are some industries that are especially good at it. I would say financial services is a pretty good example. So at Homeland Security, we had this wonderful piece of bureaucracy that was called MD 102, Management Directive 102. I've talked about it before in some of my other speeches. I love to talk about MD 102. I find it fascinating. And it kind of imposed a SDLC, a software delivery lifecycle, on all IT projects that involved writing something like 87 documents, going through 11 stage gate reviews. It defined 21 oversight roles in the oversight process. It said that all requirements had to be finalized before any other work started. And in fact, it said that all the requirements had to be written as shall statements. It said that we couldn't start testing any code until all the code was finished and somebody had issued a letter saying they'd reviewed it and determined that all the code was finished and it was ready for testing. So, you know, it's not so surprising that government IT projects sometimes take years to complete, sometimes cost billions of dollars. We actually had one that had spent about 5 years at the point that I'm going to tell you about. And it had spent about $1 billion, and it didn't actually have any results to show for it. It had some results, but they turned out to be unusable. With a process like MD 102, you can kind of understand how things expand into monstrosities like that. We found that our average release time, our cycle time for finishing a release on most of our systems was about 18 months between releases. And we were in immigration during the Obama administration, so it was kind of a fast-changing area. And that kind of speed maybe wasn't a very good match for what we needed to do. Nevertheless, we moved to the cloud and microservices. We rolled out DevOps across the agency. We went from that 18-month release cycle to deploying new features about 3 times a day on our major systems, on each of our major systems. And we did it still complying with MD 102, sort of. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I learned along the way. I actually just wrote a book on the subject. My book is called The Delicate Art of Bureaucracy, Digital Transformation with the Monkey, the Razor, and a Sumo Wrestler. You might wonder a little bit at the title. I realized as we were doing our transformation, or as I look back on it, I realized that the techniques that we had used in order to overcome our bureaucratic impediments, there were a number of them that I could identify as things that seemed to have worked for us. They fell into three categories pretty easily. The category of the kind of things a monkey would do, the kind of things a razor would do, and the kind of things a sumo wrestler would do. So in my book, I present a number of plays or actions you can take to try to overcome bureaucratic impediments, and I classify them into these three categories. You can sort of think of them as personas that we adopted in order to change bureaucracy. So that's the monkey, the razor, and the sumo wrestler. So to illustrate for you what the monkey does, what the razor does, and what the sumo wrestler does, I'm going to tell you the story of MD-102 and our struggle against MD-102 and break it down for you a little bit. So to begin with, we realized that MD-102 really was not written to support DevOps. So we knew we had to do something about that because we had to comply with MD-102. Fortunately, first thing we noticed is that, like a lot of other pieces of bureaucracy, MD-102 had an exception process. They knew that it wasn't going to be able to cover every possible